A Mother's Courage by Dilly. Read by Annie Aldington. East London, January 1879. A crowd of women had gathered outside the shipping office in Eastcheap, their pale faces masked with dread as they huddled together against the biting east wind. A sleety rain tumbled from a pewter sky, pitter-pattering softly on the cobblestones, but not a sound could be heard from those patiently waiting for news of their loved ones, except for the chattering of teeth and the occasional muffled sob. Eloise Cribb stood a little apart from them, but it was not that as an officer's wife she considered herself to be a cut above the rest. She was no snob, and her strict moral upbringing as the daughter of a clergyman had taught her that all men were equal. But she was uncomfortably aware that her elegant mantle trimmed with fur and the pert little matching hat were in sharp contrast to the shabby clothes worn by wives of the crew. She had scanned the gathering for the familiar face of the captain's wife, but she was not there. Eloise knew that the poor lady was in an advanced state of pregnancy, and her heart went out to her. How awful not to know the fate of your beloved husband when you are about to give birth to his child. The wives of the second and third mate were clinging together for comfort, and as she hardly knew them, Eloise had acknowledged them with an attempt at a smile and then moved away. She wiped a strand of long dark hair from her forehead, blinking away the raindrops that trickled down her face like tears. In her heart, she knew the answer even before the heavy oak door opened, and a way-faced official representing the shipping company appeared at the top of the stone steps. One look at his pinched features confirmed her worst fears. There was an audible intake of breath, as the wives, sweethearts, mothers and sisters waited for the inevitable announcement that the hellebore, which had now been overdue for several weeks, was lost at sea. A long drawn-out groan of despair was torn from the women's lips as the official read out the company's statement in a voice choked with emotion. Eloise listened, but the only words that registered were those she had dreaded the most. The management regrets to inform you that the Tea-Clipper hellebore went down during a typhoon in the China Sea, with the loss of all hands. A loud animal-like howl of pain was ripped from a pregnant woman's throat, and several others fainted or collapsed in the arms of their friends and relatives. Eloise stood quite still, totally silent, unable even to cry. Her brief marriage to First Officer Ronald Cribb had not been perfect, but she'd loved him dearly. The long months of enforced separation had been hard to bear, but it had made their reunion all the sweeter when at last he came home on leave. She shivered convulsively as the harsh fact dawned on her that her two children, Joseph, who would be 3 in June, and Elizabeth, a babe in arms not quite 4 months old, were now fatherless. She was a widow, and she was virtually penniless. Stunned and too shocked to feel either grief or pain, she waited in line while the counting-house clerk handed out the allotments to the distraught widows. Eloise could tell by his tight-lipped expression that he was close to tears himself, and she felt vaguely sorry for him in his onerous task. But her mind seemed to be detached from her body as she held out her hand to receive the small brown envelope. The clerk murmured condolences, but he could not look her in the eyes, and she saw that his hand shook as he fumbled for the next pay packet. Eloise moved away from the head of the queue like an automaton, putting one foot in front of the other, and yet barely conscious of what she was doing or which way she was going. All she knew was that she must get home to her babies, poor fatherless little mites, who now depended on her for everything. Blinded by the rain and tasting the salt tears that were flooding down her cheeks, she stumbled over the wet cobblestones as she headed off in the direction of Shoreditch. It was a long walk to Myrtle Street, but she did not want to waste money on the bus fare, and she needed time in which to compose herself. Her heart might be broken into shards, but she must not let the little ones sense her despair. At least they were warm and dry at home, safe in the care of her neighbour's eldest daughter, Mary, who was a stolid, reliable sort of child.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?